It's such a pleasure to be here at Radio Days. I think I'm going to stand here and do clicky clicky. First off, I'd love to thank Cyclone Alfred for this opportunity. It's been, and obviously we all love James Cridland, so it's a bit of a bummer that he's not here, but I'm so happy to be here and to talk about building your podcast audience. And we're going to talk about a lot today. We're going to go over many things. Most of these things are pertinent to podcast strategy, but if you're in radio or if you're in other audio media, it'll really carry over. So some of the stuff we're talking about directly, like directory promotion or directory features, is very podcast specific, but it's general audio. So you can WhatsApp your radio friends and be like, come here right now. There's still seats. Anyways, let's get started. Where are we now? Nope. Next. Oh, no, back. There we go. Okay. My name is Norma Jean. This is my email. I'm happy to give you a card later. I have done many things that I will talk about on the next slide. But yeah, today I'm speaking about podcast audience development, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys. And I am a podcast and media strategist. So I talk to people and businesses about how to start their podcast, how to grow their podcast, how to have a podcast, why to have a podcast. So this is a bit about me. I have over 7 years of working in podcasting directly and a really big media background. And I work with people on audience growth, content monetization. I've also done a lot of sales. I've done a lot of software sales. I've done a lot of podcast software sales. And before this, I was living in Bali, Indonesia for a long time, about 12 years. And so sometimes people are like, oh, are you the person that lived in Bali? And I have to say yes. But now I live in Europe, so I'm in a new chapter. And I love helping people develop things, right? I loved working with creators on launching new features that they can use. I love working with businesses and individual creators on how they can voice their idea and how they can create a substantial brand around that. Okay, so today we're going to talk about 4 learning objectives in terms of audience development. Now, there are many, right? But the 4 that I want to focus on today are identifying key drivers of audience growth, developing audience engagement strategies, executing multi-platform audience development, and measuring and optimizing podcast success. Now, I like to think of these 4 objectives as kind of like tires on a car, right? So like you're in the car and you're driving, you're like, okay, I'm on the way to audience development. And, when we think about audience development, most podcasters, statistically, if we're looking at, the number of podcasts, are indie podcasters. So even though they're like, I'm driving the car, really, they're on a unicycle and they're juggling at the same time. What's important in terms of audience development from a production house standpoint, from a company that has a team and can put resources behind it, is to make sure that all the wheels in the car are going in the right direction at the same time. I think a lot of the time, podcast audience development isn't thought of at the forefront. It's not cohesive throughout an entire podcast strategy in terms of brand and content. And so that's what we're also going to talk about today. I'll have questions at the end. All right, so what drives growth? This is the big question. And this is kind of the like womp womp of it all, right? Everybody wants to know what the magic secret or the magic sauce is to building a loyal and dedicated podcast audience. And it's all of these things at the same time, which is a lot. And it can be really intimidating for a lot of companies. So it's important to be organized and to think about strategically how you want to utilize each facet of marketing and branding and development for your podcast in a strategic way that's integrated throughout an entire strategy. So we're going to go through all of these together. The first is content. And obviously, I'll go through this further in my slides. We'll niche down and get more detailed, but just as a quick overview. The first is content. You want to make sure you have quality content. As I'm sure many of you have seen throughout today's program. If you were in the podcasting summit yesterday, you'll see it tomorrow. People are going to say this over and over again. Quality is key. It's really, really important. And to make sure you're consistently looking at your analytics, right? You want to make sure that you know specific analytics that we'll go into later, because that's the way your audience communicates with you, right? The next is guests. You want to make sure you have relevant guests and that they have the reach you want them to have. We'll go into that a little bit more later. PR, which is, visibility and authority, right? So that's saying, obviously we're the authority in this space, but you want to make sure you have the correct visibility. And this is within podcasting directories and the podcast industry, but it's also in general in terms of overall PR for your audio product. Partnerships, which we'll get into. I think everybody is talking about that these days, and cross promo and all that good stuff. Industry relationships, which are a bigger deal than you would think. So start making friends at this conference. No pressure. And then social and marketing, which we'll get into with campaign and SEO. Obviously, that's going to be keywords, description of your episode. There's a large percentage of success that comes from consistency. And when things are not consistent, it affects the way that people view and feel about your show or your product. We're also going to talk about branding and assets and having a consistent brand identity. Okay. First, though, we're going to talk about why does audience connection matter more than ever in podcasting. There are a million things happening all at once, all the time. TikTok, Instagram, Reels, every podcast directory you could think of, Netflix, broadcast radio, broadcast television. Everything is coming at you all the time. So it's really important to remember that connection is key. The first thing is the feels, right? Having a strong emotional connection with your audience is what's going to keep bringing them back, right? It's about making people feel something. Whenever we get excited about a new podcast episode that dropped, or, hey, it's the morning and I can't wait to hear those familiar voices on breakfast radio, whatever it is, it's that sense of like you have an emotional connection to that content. And as content creators or as people who work within audio media, fostering that connection and valuing it is really important. So you want to make sure that you're driving emotion through storytelling, contrast, right? You want to make sure that things aren't flat, but you have different ideas, different thoughts, and texture coming in. And senses. You want to describe things, right? You don't want to just say, like, I walked to the fridge. You want to say, hey, I walked over to the fridge. I opened the door. It made this creaky sound. I got a bottle of orange juice. Da, da, da. And you're walking people through, obviously, your process, so they're along with you for the ride. The next is the you of it all and focusing on your audience. We always want to make it about us. I think everybody sees the world as they are versus as it is. And so it's really important to sit in the seat of your audience and think about it from where they're listening from. Really put yourself in their shoes or in their seat and think, okay, well, how would I want this content to hear? What am I going to be doing, right? If I'm listening to a podcast, it may not be a primary media, right? I'm not just sitting and absorbing or consuming that media. I'm doing something else. Am I going for a walk? Am I washing the dishes? Am I driving my kids to school? So that's a really important consideration as well. Then we have growth and paying attention to the behavioral and listening patterns, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. But people listen to podcasts on the same device that they speak to their family on, right? It's the same device where you're calling your mom, with your AirPods in, that you're listening to a podcast with those same AirPods. And so the way that listeners consume audio is that they have that emotional connection to it, right? And so when we're talking about the way that they communicate back with you, it's going to be through where they're dropping off, what percentage of the episode they listen to. Their behavior is going to communicate how they feel. And the last is community. Creating community is everything. I think that's prevalent to the world around us. I think it's really important in general, I think in life, but within creating a brand for your audio products, whether it's podcasts or a radio show, creating a community where people feel connected. Like, hey, I listen to this and you listen to this, so we have something in common and I know we're going to be friends. It's very important. Okay, so I was recently featured in Valerie Geller's Beyond Powerful Radio book in the 3rd edition, and Valerie is a real radio veteran, and she talks a lot about authentic connection and how to create authentic connection within radio, within podcasting, and generally overall in media. And so her 3 golden rules I just want to share with you guys today is, number 1, tell the truth, right? It's going to come through if there's a facade, or if you're not clear, or if you're not really being your most authentic self. And that authenticity is going to be that unique fingerprint that really drives your audience to you. The next is to make it matter, right? Every second, I hope I'm being entertaining enough. I'll do a dance if you want later. But every second is important. So you want to make sure that you're not having lags, and that you're considering your listener's experience for every second of your episode or show, because they're communicating back with you every second as they keep listening. And the next is to never be boring, right? To make sure you're compelling and that it's worth airing or publishing on the podcasting side. Now in 2025, we're going to step it up. So that's kind of the 2025 rules to start. And, continuing with a little bit of what Valerie said, it's really important to understand what drives emotion. So the first 60 seconds of your podcast or of your radio show, if you're in radio, is really what's going to draw people in, right? And, I think it's one of those things where if we're thinking about traditional radio, they may not be joining at the beginning of the show or the program, right? And so you want to make sure, obviously, that this carries through, because they could just turn on their radio when they get in the car. But for podcasting folks, that first 60 seconds is pivotal, right? It's going to decide when, how people interact, if they like you, and if they want to stay. It's really important to have some sort of payoff. And when I say payoff, I mean value. What value are you providing? Now, entertainment is a value, as we all know, right? Attention is a value. Fun is a value. But whatever it is that you're providing, you have to make sure that it is value. And it's also really important to make sure that your audience feels heard, or they feel like they can see themselves or hear themselves in the experience. And what listeners have said is they like formats that feel familiar. This is also coming back to consistency. One of the hardest things with podcasting, and it's a little bit less prevalent because this is a professional conference, but podcasting itself is an independent medium. And so to drive consistency home is really important. That's going to be consistency with your audio signature, consistency with your show, consistency with your branding, across literally every facet of that multi-pronged strategy that I showed earlier. You also want to personalize it as much as possible. In the podcasting space, if there's listeners, I've had podcasts that are like, hey, these are our top Patreon supporters this month, and they're going to feature their names in the podcast, or those Patreon members are going to help pick an episode or select a topic. And it's also important to have engaging touch points outside the podcast or broadcast, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but part of that is creating community and your social reach as well. All right, so in terms of my strategy and what I'm adding on to Valerie's is what I've learned in terms of live stream podcasts, entertainment or enterprise media initiatives, and high impact events. So in my previous role, I produced 149 episodes. I produced, I think, 95 virtual events online. And there's a few things that I learned, that come up over and over. The first is that live is live. And whenever you're offering something that's live, there's this feeling that, it needs to be perfect, or, what if I make a mistake? And that's the point of live. That's why people are tuning in, because they want to be part of that energy. And so if mistakes happen, or if live happens, you have to just roll with it. I think that you can bounce back from most things. And then sometimes you just have to keep it moving. Energy is also just as important as information. I think nowadays, and what we've seen in terms of social media and how the world works, is that enthusiasm has value. Fun has value. And that's not just in terms of talent, that's also in terms of the content. So you want to keep that energy fresh at all times. And that if your content doesn't drive emotion, it won't make an impact. If people don't have a connection to you or the story you're telling or the information that you're sharing, if it doesn't have value, they're not in for it. You don't want to just create a show or a product. You want to create an experience for people. People want to have an experiential connection to your content. Okay, Now I want to talk about directories and discovery engagement strategy. So one of the top ways that people grow their audiences within podcasting is through directories. Now, when I say directory, I think if anybody doesn't know, I'm just going to explain because there are no small or stupid questions in podcasting. A directory is your Spotify, your Apple Podcast, your Amazon Music, anywhere people are listening to your podcast and the audio is listed and your show is listed and the audio is pulled via the RSS feed, that is a podcast directory. Now, it is one of the top audience development lanes because the people who are on directories are already listening to podcasts. When you're on social media, right, when you're doom scrolling Instagram or TikTok or somebody sends you a meme and you're like, oh, let me check this out. Everybody on those platforms aren't podcast listeners. And so when you go to where the podcast listeners are, they are more likely to listen to your podcast. That's the strategy around directories. Now, there's a couple of strategies I want to talk about in terms of directories. The first is keywords and SEO, right? Whatever your podcast or your content is about, you want to make sure that it is as clear as possible and that it will be pulled up in the directory, right? And because a lot of the time people are going into Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts or wherever they want to listen, whatever app they're on that they like listening to, they're going to go into that search bar and they're going to search for maybe cats. We'll say cats, right? So if your episode is all about cats, you need to have cats in the title, cats in the description, cats in your transcripts. It's really important, and obviously that's a very elementary example, but it's very important to have that consistency throughout and to be clear that the keywords are going to match what your content is so that people can find the appropriate content that they want and they're going to find your content. The second is directory features. And I think this is kind of the golden thing that everybody wants. Some directories offer features for free. You can apply through portals they set up. Apple specifically has one where you can literally just submit your podcast and they'll decide if they want to feature it. For those of us in the industry, go back to those Spotify speakers from earlier today and make friends with them. It's one of those things where cultivating those relationships, cultivating distribution and distributor relationships is a full-time role for a lot of companies. And if you're an indie podcaster, you do what you can. It's not one of those things where you're not on the in. There are always ways to get features. There are always independent podcast directories that maybe don't have the uses of Spotify or the users of Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but will still make an impact. So don't feel like it's a hill you can't climb. Just try and climb it differently, if that makes sense. I think most people here are within the audio industry, but we talk about this a lot within podcasting because it started out as an independent medium. People had to bootstrap it, right? And there's still that element of use everyone you know to figure out how to get to where you want to go in podcasting. And so there's still that spirit of it. A lot of it is corporate these days, but that doesn't mean that it's unattainable. It just means that it's more professional, if that makes sense. The next is create and leverage partnerships. So it's really important to find other podcasts, and obviously if we're talking about radio, other shows that work within your niche. And you want to get creative with value, right? Maybe that's an ad swap. Maybe that's a promo swap. Maybe that's an episode swap. Maybe that's a segment of an episode. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that, you cast your net wide so that your podcast is found as much as possible in every directory that you can be in, pretty much. So let's dive deep a little bit on collaborations and cross-promo. So guest swaps are going to be of multiple things, right? We have promos. We have ads. We have content crossovers. So a promo is like a trailer, right? So a lot of the time what you'll see, and a lot of networks are already doing this, right? So if you're within a production house or a podcast network, you already have a library of shows and you already have somebody on staff who's doing this work. If you're an independent podcaster or you are a traditional radio broadcaster and you're looking to branch out, you just have to do the work yourself. It's not like it's undoable. It just means that you have to kind of like drink more coffee to just get there. But yeah, so it's, if you've ever seen, I want to say Serial. They put out sometimes trailers of other shows that the New York Times has put out, that kind of thing. So you'll see, hey, we have this friend who made this other show, and I've worked with them before. My friends have worked with them, and I really like them. So that's a direct promo. And sometimes that'll be a direct exchange, and sometimes that'll be paid. Sometimes that'll be a favor. There's no set formula. Yes, people pay for them. Yes, they are favors. It's a yes and. Same with ads. I've seen direct ad swaps where people say, hey, we have about the same number of downloads. I've got 50,000 a month. You've got 50,000 a month. Let's run ads on each other's shows for our shows. Totally fine. Sometimes one person has 10,000 and one person has 50,000 per month. So the person who has 10,000 runs 5 ads for every one that the person with 50,000 ads, right? So you just kind of have to get scrappy with it. And I think this crowd is a little bit more corporate. But that being said, if you're a smaller house or you're working with smaller production or independent podcast creators, you can still work with them and you can still leverage their audiences and their content to fit within your strategy. Social collaborations is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, I think we've all seen Instagrams that tag multiple people and are pretty straightforward, but also different content and different content creators have different platforms that they do well on, right? Some content's going to do really well on Instagram. Other content's going to do really well on TikTok versus X. It's about what hits for your content and your talent. The next is brand partnerships. And this can be something that you think would work one way, but can also work the other way. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in my case study, which is coming. But in terms of brand partnerships, sometimes the brand really benefits from offering something free to the podcast or the network that will bring them in new subscribers or new users. So it doesn't always have to be, hey, I want that brand money, or you can start the relationship with how can we work together on a limited budget, or how can we collaborate first and then let's see budget, which really works. Events are a great way to collaborate. You can do AMAs, which is an Ask Me Anything. You can do live shows. You can do special events. This is for people who sign up and are patrons of your show. This is for people who just love your show, and you can market it through your socials or through your email newsletter list. After events, you always want to follow up and share, hey, this event was so great, because you want to create that demand for the next one. You want them to want to be part of your community. And the thing about audience development that I'm just going to keep hammering home is that every guest, every brand opportunity, every social post is an opportunity to reach new listeners, but also an opportunity to reinforce your brand and that consistency. Okay, so social obviously is a very big one. Social repurposing and content funnels. And we've heard about this throughout some of the podcasting content that's been here at Radio Days Europe this year. Short clips are big, right? TikTok has taken over the world, I think, for a lot of people. There's Instagram Reels, there's YouTube Shorts. You want to make sure you're repurposing your content. This is pretty clear. Even for people that do not have a video-first strategy, it's very important to have these clips. Maybe you're not recording video when you're recording your main episodes and your main content, right? Maybe you just have a phone set up capturing like behind the scenes footage that you're going to lay the audio over. People want video. It's going to drive eyeballs. We live in a doom scroll world. That's where we are right now. That is what it is. There are many programs and many ways to do this. You can hire people. You can use AI software. There are some great ones. But it is a main driver for listener growth and community growth. I think, how many people in this room have been sent like a viral clip of a podcast on their phone from a friend, like a meme? Right. Yeah. And like while we're watching them, we're thinking, oh, right, I should create this. Right. Well, we should create it. Yeah. Additionally, there's quote graphics and audiograms. So, it's something where sometimes if you're looking at, and this really depends on the kind of content. If it's something that's maybe wellness-based or, really about spirituality, people love quote graphics, right? So maybe you have a quote from the podcast. You want to make sure that it's clear and consistent with your audience and what they like, but audiograms do incredibly well on Instagram and X. Yeah, there's also summarized threads where you summarize the episode and you say, here's the top 5 takeaways. It makes people want to listen to it. They do really well on LinkedIn. They do really well in LinkedIn groups. And for everybody who built a Facebook group that's still really active, because a lot of people are keeping Facebook because of the groups, that's what people are seeing. So I think in terms of how you market your content with social, you want to be very clear on how each platform performs algorithmically with your kind of content. And that's going to be done through trial and error. I mean, I think it's one of those things where you can have an idea and then you run it, and it may not necessarily end up what you think, right? But you will have the feedback of the listeners to tell you that. You'll have the feedback of your followers, of your community that you've built. Okay, now we're talking about live events, networking, and community building. So direct engagement matters. People want to feel like they can connect with you. They want to be able to, either in person or virtually or through social media, feel like they have access to you. That's part of the beauty of the medium of audio, and specifically podcasting, right? It still has that feeling of being independent. And, obviously earlier today I came from the session with Dua Lipa. I don't think they want everybody to go up to Dua Lipa and be like, great podcast. But how many podcasts are hosted by Dua Lipa, right? And so people want to feel like they're part of that experience and like they can directly connect with you. If your host or if your team is open to that, try. Please. That can even be like an online thing, right? It can be submit your question. The host doesn't even have to directly interact. It can be, you can email out your community base and say, hey, everybody, we're having this special event for our patron subscribers or for our premium subscribers. We want to let you know they're going to answer a few special questions at the end if you want to submit any question you specifically have. There are many ways to do this without direct interaction, but it's important to do it. People want to engage. Direct interactions, they build trust. As I mentioned, and I'm just going to keep saying this, like people are listening to your audio content the way they are talking to their mom. It is all one device now, and psychologically, they have the same connection. They're listening to the podcast thinking, they're just like they're listening to family members that they know and love. There is a psychological phenomenon where people have a feeling of intimacy because we're all using the same device. And listeners who are part of a community want to stay and be part of that community. There's a sense of belonging that's really valuable. Like I mentioned earlier, if somebody says, I listen to this, and you say, I listen too, then you have something in common and there's an immediate sense of trust there. So key strategies in terms of live events and community building. Conferences, make friends. Please, after this, stand up, say hi and shake hands and add 3 people around you on LinkedIn. It really does help. Live audience recordings and panels, in person or virtually, people want to feel like they're part of something, right? So if they love your show, even if they don't immediately join the live, they might watch the replay. They will definitely see the email that has the recap in it. They will definitely want to know what the answer to their question is if they submitted a special question in advance, that kind of thing. You want to make sure that you're aligned with brands and creators to expand reach and visibility, and community events that create a feeling of belonging. People will just want to feel like they're part of something. And what's great about podcasting is they feel that connection to you one-on-one, and you want to make sure that connection goes beyond that one voice or those voices they're hearing directly in their ear and into the community that you've built of everybody who's having that experience. Email newsletters are a very big one. It seems outdated, but they are not. You want to offer a newsletter. You want to have episode highlights. You want to have guest behind the scenes. You want to have news. You want to have upcoming guests, all of that. So super, super important. Build a community. Do it wherever your audience is. That's pretty much what I can say about that. Okay, so quick case study, because we only have a couple minutes left. Okay, great. We're going to just zoom through this. So Katrin Skapertas has a podcast called Italian for Sure. She is an audience development professional, and this is a really great case study because you're watching someone who works in audience dev launch their podcast. So that's what we're going to talk about for a second. And they have really gone hard in terms of utilizing a lot of the strategies she uses for clients for her own show. So it's really fun to kind of see exactly what she's doing. And in real time, you know, when she's working with clients or when audience development experts are working with clients, you don't necessarily know what they're doing because they're not posting about it. They're not showcasing it as their brand or their podcast. So this is a really fun one. In terms of branding and assets, you're going to see that her podcast, Italian for Sure, has a very clear graphic, right? The street is called Via Catrin. That's her name. It's got the Italian flag and streamers. The branding is very consistent. In terms of content, it's really top quality. She has some of the top guests in Italy, and the podcast is all about Italy, and she speaks only to Italians. She doesn't speak to expats. She doesn't speak to people who are visiting. She really only speaks to Italians that live in Italy to talk about Italian culture. In terms of guests, she's had, you know, the creative soul of Venki Chocolate, Spotify's GM of Europe. She's had some incredible guests. In terms of PR, it's really about enhanced visibility. And she has had some media features, the way she talks about it, I'm going to show in a second. And then industry relationships, like I mentioned, we all want those directory features, and her social media and event strategy. So really quickly, I went to her launch in Milan. It was amazing. It was in a subway station. There was a DJ. I'm like not cool. I was like, wow, we're in a subway. Like it was in this like underground thing, and there was like natural wine, and there was a DJ, and I was like, okay, this is her brand. This is amazing. You're getting the inside underground vibe of Italy. So it definitely was cohesive with the brand, and created this community of people who wanted to come out, meet her, see the show, and were really excited to be part of what she was building. In terms of leveraging LinkedIn directories and discoverability, every directory feature she gets, she highlights it. She may not tag the specific contact she has there, but she has that contact and she's tagging the directory. In terms of guest collaborations, like I mentioned, she's, you know, getting some of the top people that she can. And it's that really interesting combination in terms of guests, right? Because I don't know about all of you, but I think we've all maybe heard of or experienced having a very high profile guest who does not share the content. And so it's really important to get the most highest profile guest you can that will share the content, which she's done an incredible job at. She also cross-promoted with those guest audiences. In terms of her social strategy, she used TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels, and promoted, you know, through these like super viral short clips, right? What does ciao mean? In Italy, everybody's like, ciao, ciao, ciao bella. What does it mean? Where does it come from? Where does the saying come from? Everybody wants to know that. That's a viral moment. She puts it on Instagram. It has over 1.1 million views. And then she links back to it in LinkedIn. Everything references back, right? So when you're creating that audience, it's everything references back to, and you're part of this journey. And do you remember when? And do you remember when I posted this clip? And watch the clip again. It's consistency. She also did an amazing event collaboration with Barry's, you know, Barry's Boot Camp. It's like a fitness moment. I think it's originally from LA. Years and years ago, if you threw up, they gave you a free t-shirt. It was like a thing. It was like a real like LA thing, but I don't think they can do that anymore. But anyways, they have one in Milan. She did an incredible collaboration with them where she brought 42 potential new customers. They offered a free class, and they got all of the social media content from everybody that came and got a free class and was like, look at me, I'm in front of Barry's in my cute workout outfit. Like, that is who they want. And so it was a fantastic collaboration. This is what I mean in terms of brand collaborations. They might not always give you direct money, but you can offer direct value to your community. So in terms of metrics, you want to focus on the percentage of listeners that finish an episode. When is the drop off? When are you getting boring? How long do your episodes need to be? Very clear. Where are they coming from? What directories? How are they getting there? Focus on that. Time spent listening, what's the average duration? And, you know, biggest takeaways are really diversify your audience, right? Get clear on where your audience wants to hang out, where your audience wants to listen, what they want to listen to, and focus on building that community of people who are engaged and excited to connect with each other and you and your content. Yeah. And then that's me. Thanks so much. Okay, so does anybody have any questions? Are there any questions? Are there any questions? We have 5 minutes. Okay, does anyone want to go back to, yeah, question. So, based on your experience, yeah. Not having yeah.
I'll repeat that. So based on your experience and not having like a big budgets to launch like that.
Yeah, totally.
What would be the basic minimum, bare minimum to actually start with?
Right. So Katrin is independent. She made that podcast independently and she didn't have budget. That's why I used it as a case study. Yeah, because she does this professionally. You know, that's literally her day job. And for her own project, she didn't have budget. And so all of that work that you just saw, Barry's Bootcamp collaboration, 1.1 million on Instagram, and I think 1.3 million views on TikTok for a clip about how Italy has a paid maternity leave. That was all done organically. Yeah.
So basically, you're saying that that would be recommended when you're ready with all the stuff that goes consistently all over.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Correct. Yeah. So it's actually not about money. It's about labor. Yeah. That's the thing that nobody's saying in terms of audience growth. What's the magic formula? Labor. It's a lot of work. That's why we have one here. Hi. Hello. It's not working. I don't know. Is it working? Okay. Oh, no, I don't know.
It's working now. That was me. I'm Marcio from the Portuguese Podcast Festival.
Yes.
We work a lot with independents. And this, if you've been with the same sessions as me, I keep repeating this.
Yeah.
Discoverability is still a big issue.
Yeah.
In both in saturated markets, but also in smaller markets where the big players are just the only ones that appear.
Yeah.
So are there any new trends or any good solutions or case studies that you know of to increase or to be a little bit more strategic to be found, apart from the ones that you mentioned that indeed can be used?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the market. Portugal is a very interesting market. Are we speaking about Portugal specifically? We can. Yeah, I mean, first off, you want to focus on where people are, right? And so if they're on YouTube, start on YouTube. And, you know, what are the highest profiles guests that those indie podcasts can get? I mean, it sounds like one of those things where it's a little bit like American and grabby. And also, that's what works that I've seen. I'm sure there are like other ways to do it, but it seems to be this very like it's this thing where it's like, oh, it's this magic formula. No, it's a lot of work that is very consistent, and you're constantly asking for the most every single time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true that celebrities work, but that seems to be the only thing that works, and that's a little bit frustrating as well for a lot of indie that need to reach out to that person because they know that once they have it, they will be visible. But
I don't mean celebrity. No. Let me be clear about this. I don't necessarily mean celebrity. And I've had live virtual events. I've had guests on my podcast who are huge, who do not get as many downloads, as guests who are actively sharing, as guests who are very relevant to the topic, as guests who want the podcast to succeed and are very specific to that niche. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's celebrity. You just have to get super clear on and when I say maximum, I don't mean like the most famous person ever. I mean the most perfect person who will share it the most, who is the most relevant for your niche consistently, every single week, with clips, with PR, with directory, with events. It's a lot. That's the magic formula. Exhaustion. Please drink more coffee. I want to say that it's some other thing and there's like a magic button back here, but that's literally what it is. It's such a like so many pieces in the air moving thing that it's just where you have to be really organized or you have to have a big team. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thanks, everybody. I think I'm at time. This has been fun. Please add me and tag me on LinkedIn. Happy to make friends. Thank you. Okay. Is the next person here?
Thanks, Norma Jean. Stick around this room for the next session. We are going to talk about news fatigue when it comes to war and conflict reporting. It's going to be a good session because I produced it, so stick around.